Hi, my name is Sandra Orme and welcome to one of my online tutorials for how to produce dramatic skies in pastels. Now the piece I'm working on today is based on a photograph I took down the valley from the studio. So that's the view from the house really, so I'm quite lucky that way. Now the videos have been broken down into different stages, so it's step by step, takes you through the process that I used to create this piece and the pastels that I used. And I've used Unison Pastels on Clairefontaine pastel matte paper. I hope you enjoy the tutorials and I hope it gives you an idea of how I work, but also inspires you to create your own piece. I look forward to seeing them. More information can be found out on my website, which is sandraorme.com, or by following me on Facebook, Instagram and so on. But please do feel free to get in touch. I'd love to know how your piece turned out and what you were inspired to create. Let me know what you think. Cheers! Hi everybody, what I'm going to do is a set of videos which will hopefully take you through step by step how to create this picture in pastels or your own sunset picture. Now this is a photograph I took locally of the view down the hill from the studio, so it's a nice local scene from what I can see here. Now the first thing to do is to arrange your pastels in the basic palette. Now this won't be just the colours you use, there'll be other colours that are involved, but it's just a starting off. Now what I've done here is gone from arrange from the darker end of the spectrum down to some of the paler tones here. Now I've also included things like a pink, because although the picture has got quite a lot of pink and yellow in it, I don't want to put too much yellow in at this stage, because if you add yellow right now you're going to get a green. So I'm just sticking to a kind of base palette that I'll be using in the piece, and then a few other colours in there like this sort of pink and a slight cream colour here as well. So just arrange your initial tones to get a range of what you want to do, but do try and make sure that these colours are quite harmonious and they're not going to blend and make some really unpleasant colours in there. So it's also quite useful to perhaps put a strip down the side of your paper like I've done here, if you can see that from where you are. Now this strip here, I'm going to just put these colours on here so you get an idea of how they run. And it can be quite useful to work your way down your palette and just check that you've got colours that are going to harmonise quite well together. So what I've done here is going through all the blues, and I've also added in some purples as well. Now I've got about 3 different shades of purple there. Then I've also got some paler blue tones as well. So there's this one here and this one here. Now actually, having done that, I can see straight away that that tone there is quite green, so I probably won't use that one there. I'll put that over to one side. So this is why this sort of thing is useful, because you can immediately see if something's going to clash and not quite work. But I also want to use this lovely pink as well. Now this pink goes pretty well with those purple tones, so it will blend really nicely with them, but I have to be careful because it won't blend necessarily that well with some of these blues. So the purple will be that bridging colour between the blues and between the pink. And I also want to include quite a few greys. So we're thinking about these sort of palettes, this sort of colour scheme, as you can see here. This is like my base palette to start off with. So having those separated out, let's get started. Now the first thing I like to do is use the side of the pastel and get on in there really quickly. So I'm going to start off with some of this really dark colour through here. Now I'm using Unison Pastels. I really like Unison. I think they're great in terms of the colours and the richness of the tones and so on, the way they go on. I think they're really lovely to use. But obviously you need to bear in mind what your budget is and what you can afford to use. But if you can use some pastels of a decent quality, then I definitely recommend the Unison ones, because they'll end up building up really nice layers on your picture. And some of the cheaper pastels tend to work initially fairly well, but as you gradually add colour, what you will find is that they stop layering up and they stop building on top of each other. So they just, gradually just fall off the paper. Now the paper I'm using today is Clairefontaine Pastel Matte, and it's one that I do use a lot. So most of my work on the website will be in pastel matte, although I do use occasionally the Snellier pastel card quite a bit as well. But the pastel matte, I find for things like sunsets is really good, because you can build lots of layers, and it's quite a soft tooth, so when you touch it, it feels quite soft, but when you blend, if you look at that bit there, you can just see there's virtually no movement at all. It's sticking really well to the surface. It lets me put lots of layers on, which is what I want to do with this technique. So what I'm doing here is I'm getting in there and I'm covering the surface pretty quickly using, as I said, the side of the pastels, and then building up some of those tones. So I'm going in with quite a strong pink there. Now, what you're not trying to do is you're not trying to colour match. You're not kind of going, well, I must make an exact copy of this on there. That's not what we're doing. You're not trying to find that exact colour there and in your, sets of pastels and put it on. You're actually going to mix on the surface and, see what comes. And it might be the colours end up being quite different, and that is entirely fine. You have to work with what you've got, don't you? Other times it may be that you think, oh, okay, that's worked out fairly well. Or you may get some happy accidents, So be fairly flexible with it. But unfortunately, like I said, you need to, use some fairly decent quality pastels as well. Otherwise, when you start building lots of layers on, what you'll find is that, things will gradually just start to scrape rather than build up on the surface. So I'm just blocking in and covering that surface over. And this is how all my pieces begin. So they start off looking pretty messy. And I'm obviously using fairly uniform direction here, but that's because the clouds themselves are moving in that direction on here, and there's that movement up that way. And it's a bit more horizontal through here, but generally it's heading up this way. So I'm also thinking about where I'm placing the colours. So things like that more mustard cream colour I just put on there. It's quite a dark tone on here, but on here it appears quite bright. So that works fairly well next to those purples, but I wouldn't use that colour up by the yellows, up by the blues rather, because what you're going to get then is a sort of green happening. So I'm just being more careful there. But I could use that paler grey, which is this one here, and just put a bit of that up there. That mixes quite fine with that. Mixes quite well. Now, let's just add, so I'm layering up straight away, and I'm not just putting one colour in one area. I'm not saying, well, that bit's the dark blue, that bit's the dark purple, and so on. I'm layering as I go straight away. So don't be worried about adding lots of colour on there. And of course, one of the joys of pastels is that if you do go hideously wrong, which of course you're not going to do, it's going to be perfect, obviously. But if you do go hideously wrong, then you can always get a brush and dust it away and, revisit that and, work over it again. So it's not too much of a problem. Now I'm debating this very strong blue, whether to put a little bit up here and a bit more through here and so on. So a little dash through there, but not too much again, because I want that pink to show up nicely there. Right, so as you can see, got quite a lot of colour on there. I can see some areas where there's not much on there. So what you're looking to do with this technique is build up a nice thin layer. So although I've been quite bold with the movement, I haven't pressed that hard. And so the layers, you can see the paper or the other colours underneath coming through. So just be aware of that. Don't be too heavy-handed. You can put plenty on, but just don't do it to the point where it's already filling the tooth up completely. But you want enough on there so that when you begin to blend, it starts to move. So you remember earlier on I was just showed you how I rubbed a little bit and nothing happened at all, nothing moved. What's going to happen now, hopefully with enough on there, is it will start to move. Now, I also didn't do anything with the drawing out. I didn't draw it out, map it out and so on. So there might be errors and things not in the right position, but it's not really about that. This is just a starting point, and we're moving on from that to create and see what happens and create something interesting. So this is the fun bit. I'm going to blow the dust off first, so just 1 second. Okay, so that gets the excess dust off, and then we're going to start blending. So bear in mind, earlier on, nothing was moving at all. So at this stage, what we've got then is we've got the colours starting to blend quite freely. Now, I'm using my fingers, and I'm using 2 or 3 fingers at a time. I'm using circular movements with this. So that's the way I begin my blend. Now, obviously I'm using circular movements because it's a sky. We've got these sort of soft movement on the clouds and the detail here and so on. So I'm just doing it in that way. If it was something else like the land below, I wouldn't be using circular movements. So just building up. And this is the fun bit, I think. When you do it, you think, oh, that's quite a nice effect. I quite like that. It might occasionally go, oh, I'm not quite sure about that. For example, just now I'm just thinking, I'm not entirely sure about that. That's rather a big purpley block there. So I might come back and just cover that over. But it's okay for now, we're just building up and just getting a feel for it. Now moving up through here, up through there. Now I'm happily letting my pink fingers go up into there. I'm not worried too much. So by the way, if you are a person who does not like getting messy, then pastels may not be for you. Okay, now getting that on the surface and then rubbing it in, and already it gets some nice effect. You think, well, I quite like this sort of purplish tone through here. I don't like it there, but I do like the way it's mixed with the pink here. So we're going to move further down now. Now I want this cloud here to pull down a bit into this area because this is a bit high, I think. So I'm going to deliberately bring my fingers down over that bit and let those colours blend together there. And just let that move along here. And I'm also changing direction slightly. So I'm doing circular, but I'm also doing a little bit of horizontal. So I'm letting that mix together there, which gives it quite a nice subtle effect through there. And then further along here, quick wipe of my fingers on my apron, and then moving along to here. And just, it's a bit dry is a funny word to use when you're talking about pastels, but it does feel strangely dry and stiff there. So I'm putting a bit more pastel on that. So I might just go along a bit here and add a bit more into there of some of those just paler tones. Now I want to get rid of this really purpley block here. So let's put a bit of that sort of mid-grey purple on there. That is, of course, the technical term for that colour, mid-grey purple. I mean, Unison are fantastic. The colours are numbered, so it's quite hard to remember which ones are which, I'm afraid. But I do tend to use the same palettes a lot, so it's fairly straightforward. Right, so having done that, I'm now going to use more of a horizontal movement for the hillsides here. So I'm going to go along here, not worried about where the horizon line is particularly, not worried about the mess I'm making there, just pulling that along there and just smoothing that through. Okay, so this is your first blend. That's just the first layer. So it's simply a starting point to then work on top of. So what we've got here is you've laid out fairly clearly, I think, the lighter areas. We've got this lovely bank of pink, purple cloud, and it's going up into the darkness here. And this dark I'm really quite happy with that because that balances the dark down here. And then we've got this pink. Now this cloud is bigger than it needs to be, but that's okay, because what I'm going to do is cut back in with the light on top of it and work that through. So just to recap then, and this is step one for working on this picture here, or your own sunset picture. The first thing to do then is to choose a palette of colours that are going to work fairly well together. So I've got around, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 colours here, but I'd recommend at least 6 ideally. Work with what you've got, of course, and try and go from, dark to light. So what I've got on here, if you can see that there, I've got some quite dark colours here, and I'm going down towards these more blue tones, and then I've got some lovely purples, various shades of purple. Then I'm going into grey and that kind of warm mustard peach colour, not peach, mustard kind of cream colour there. And then I've got a paler blue which goes with those there. And I've got the pink, which obviously does not go well with the blue, but it will go okay with the purples. So that pink needs to be used next to purple rather than straight next to blue, because that would not work. So you can throw in the odd colour that's not going to harmonise well with everything else, but you need to make sure you have a bridging colour or a buffer colour around it. So when you do this big blending, you don't make a great big mess. Now, I then organised my palette. I then blocked in quite quickly and worked over the top and just layered the colours up straight away. So it wasn't a question of one colour here, one colour there, and it also wasn't a question of trying to colour match anything on here. It really was mixing the colour on the surface and just seeing what happens. So 2 or 3 shades overlapping. They also weren't put on too heavy-handedly, so put on quite delicately, thin layers, dramatically, fast, bold, but not heavy-handed. Having then put lots of layering on and just blocked in very quickly where things went. I did do some movement, thinking about the movement of the cloud. I did change direction here. And then after that, when you've got enough on there, you can start blending. So we're on Clairefontaine Pastel Matte, don't forget. So initially, it feels quite stiff and quite hard work, but don't be worried about that, that's fine. Just go with it, and we can start blending straight away. So you blend your colours in, use circular movements where appropriate, thinking about clouds here, change direction as needed as you work. Down towards here, I change direction to more of a horizontal movement here. So you're just working it in and then getting your base. If something goes hideously wrong in the first instance, don't worry, you can always cover up at this stage because the tooth is still quite strong. Or you can get a bit of colour as you're going, like I did for this bit here that was the dreadful purple lump here. Put a bit of that purple grey over it and just tone that in a bit. So we can add as you go and give it a general blend in. So that then is step one for how to produce this picture.